Hi.
Hi there.
Hi
Hello,
there. Hello.
PyCon.
So welcome to day two Python Effect 2020. Carol, thank you very much for willing to support us again. You were here last year because this is hosted by PyCon MY. You were in PyCon MY 2019.
Yeah,
So
I had a lovely time last time, and I hope that everybody gets as much out of this conference. I know a lot of people have been working hard behind the scenes to change it up from an in-person conference to a virtual conference. So thank you, everybody, for doing that. And hopefully we'll get some great questions today, too.
yeah, we have a lot of hiccups yesterday, and we learned a lot of things. And I think this is going to be a new norm for future. So we're going to have in person and also virtual conferences. So it's a
Right.
good learning. Yeah. So before we start, I have a few announcement. One announcement from the program manager.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Today is the last day for anyone who is interested to join the lightning talk. So if they are interested, the registration link is available in the in the video description. Okay. So anyone who wish to do lightning talk, don't miss the chance to do it, to register. Okay. Okay. That's all I think. So we're going to continue with our conversation with Miss Carol. Okay, I just give an introduction. Miss Carol Winning is one of the key members in CPython, and for those who use Jupyter, will likely know that she is the one of the creator of Jupyter project, and currently serving in the Project Jupyter steering committee. So beside Project Jupyter, Carol is also active contributor for Interact, Binder, and many other open source projects. So I think this is relevant with our topic today, which we're going to get insight from Carol. How she become a core developer for so many projects. So so there's no slide to share. So we
Yeah.
continue with we continue with the our conversation. Okay. For audience, you are welcome to send question. We'll go through the question in between, and then we also have welcome Carol to Icon Effect. So, Carol, from your point of view, who is considered as a core developer?
Yeah, so in CPython, which is core Python, a core developer is someone who has the ability to merge code into the GitHub repo. So, in a sense, we say they have a commit bit, but that's a small fraction of the many, many contributors that we have to core Python. Most contributors are not core developers. They're people like all of you who find something that they want to work on and make a pull request, and then hopefully it will get merged in and then be a part of core Python.
Okay. Oh, sorry. All right. Thanks. Okay. I would say that most of the core developers are actually volunteers, right? They not.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, and most people don't realize it. A lot of other projects, most of the core developers are sponsored by their corporations. Python is different in that sense. There's very few people who get release time to work on CPython as part of their job. Victor Stinner is one, Brett has a little bit of time, but by and large, everybody who works on core Python is a volunteer, which um, has challenges because as volunteers, you can't make anybody do something. They have to want to do it, and it needs to be fulfilling for them as well as beneficial for the language. So, people come and go, life circumstances happen. What we've tried to do the last couple years is um, start a triage group, and the triage group is actually going through the bugs.python.org issue tracker and helping to do like a first pass to see if something's a bug, or add additional information if needed. And that has been really helpful because it's given people a way to kind of onboard into the project and get progressively more rights in terms of building the trust with the core developers, and also having greater opportunity to be mentored by a core developer. I think most of the core developers would like to mentor people, but our time is really limited. So we like to do sort of sprints and help teach larger groups of folks to contribute to core Python. I know when I was at PyCon Korea last year, we did a sprint and got some folks onboarded to core Python, and ultimately somebody actually did become a core developer, which is fantastic. And that's how, best case scenario. But beyond core Python, there's a lot of other projects in our ecosystem that folks can use to get involved with open source and to build both experience and reputation within the open source community. And core Python, because it's a language that's been around for 30 years, people expect a certain level of stability. So in many ways, it's not as rapidly a moving project as something like Jupyter Notebooks or Jupyter Lab. We had much fewer people working on that, and with the high demand, a lot more activity. But with core Python, many businesses, governments are running their code bases on top of Python. So we want to make sure that, we first and foremost maintain the quality of the language, address security issues as they come up. Features are secondary to that. And, our job is also to help people understand what is core Python, where it is going in the future. And, recently we increased our release cadence so that before it took about 2 years to get a release out, and now we're working towards a 1-year cycle. And 3.9, which is going to come out fairly soon, will be the first release that has gone through that more compressed cycle. We won't see as many new features in it, but what we will see is it much easier to onboard folks from one level of a release to another, and still get the same level of testing and beta and release candidates that we did before. So hopefully that answers some of the questions about what core developers do. Actually, I probably haven't answered what core developers do. What do core developers do? Well, some of us write code, and some in C, because there is some C in the code base, but predominantly the code base is now also written in Python. So people will look at issues and try and bug fix. There's a number of people that are interested. Marietta, for example, has been absolutely phenomenal in creating tooling and workflow around the project. And her bots are legendary for, both, welcoming folks on the GitHub repo, but also doing the cherry picking. When we have a bug fix, the bot will go back for us and apply that fix to prior releases, which used to be a really time-consuming process for core developers, which also wasn't that exciting. Then there's other folks like myself who are involved in more of the day-to-day governance of CPython. That is what the steering council does. We meet each week and talk about like PEPs that are up for, and PEPs for those folks that haven't been in the Python community for a while. It's a Python enhancement proposal. So anytime there's a significant change to the language, people will submit an enhancement proposal so that all the core developers, as well as the greater community, can see what that change would be, how it would be implemented, and then either the PEP delegate, which is somebody that the steering council will appoint somebody who has particular experience in the area, and then they will be the ones that make the final decision. Otherwise, it goes to the steering council, and then we spend our time reading it, and hopefully, everything's in line, and we can go ahead and approve it. There's a great question in the chat: can we contribute documentation as core developers? And the answer is absolutely yes. Documentation is not just writing words, it's also internationalization of documentation. And there's a lot of code and tooling around how documentation is built. And it's a pretty sophisticated system because Python's been around for a long time, and it has a lot of linking between places in the documentation. And we've been known for having pretty solid documentation. So there are absolutely core developers like myself who spend a lot of time trying to improve the documentation because it makes it easier for folks to use the language. And then there's also the Python Developers Guide. So if folks wanted to learn about how to contribute to Python, that would be the place to start. And that is devguide.python.org. And core developers and community members alike will contribute to that document. It's pretty extensive, and it's a pretty good how to contribute to open source, but in particular, how to contribute to core Python. So hopefully that answers some of the questions.
Wow, that's quite long answers. And also I noticed that the activities looks like the core developers are quite a closely knit group. So because they are not co-located, they're everywhere on the globe. How do core developers communicate? Maintain the
Amongst themselves.
communication.
Yeah. Communication is a really hard thing with any open source project of any size. What we have is traditionally, the core developers have all communicated with mailing lists and IRC. The more modern developers have moved away from IRC. You see more Slack and other things like that. And what we have is a discourse site that lets us do more of that interactive chat type communication, and it has the added benefit that it can be moderated. And then also for some things, some folks actually use Zulip, which is another open source project, to communicate. Definitely the website for Python has all the PEPs and also the release dates and the release plans. So that's another way that we communicate with each other. And then there are smaller groups of people that actually will meet online and do sort of video chats. But by and large, most stuff gets either handled on the bug tracker on GitHub, where we have the pull requests, or one of the communication channels, whether it's mailing lists, Discourse, or Zulip.
Okay. And then one thing is like yourself, you are involved in many projects, right? How do you find time to handle all of this? How do you focus? Do you have many things in your mind?
Yeah, I think although I work on a lot of different projects, I don't necessarily do the same thing on each project. So not each project doesn't get the same amount of attention. I personally, what I do is I build myself a dashboard, and what it does is it will hit the GitHub API, and it will tell me like simple things like if continuous integration and testing, if it's red or green, passing or failing. It will also tell me if the documentation is building or failing. And then it will give me a couple metrics like how many issues got opened in the last 2 weeks, how many PRs got opened in the last 2 weeks. And how that helps me is I can look at a project and see at a glance, okay, there's been a lot of activity, or there's not, too much activity, so I don't need to check it as often. But I think, really when I contribute to a project, it's something I believe in. It's something I think either helps the world or I enjoy working on. And for example, Jupyter, I was attracted to Jupyter before it even had the name Jupyter, because I thought it would be a great way to teach people different programming languages, help onboard people into different scientific projects. Somebody had mentioned Octave, and that is a Jupyter kernel that is based on MATLAB. So, Jupyter is definitely, something that I've found really amazing, and the Python community as well. There's so many different ways to be a part of the Python community, whether you're organizing and running conferences, helping at your local user groups, giving talks, writing blog posts. We in the Python community, and in particular the Python Software Foundation, has really encouraged and fostered community and building up community globally. And I think that sets, in some ways, Python apart from some other languages, just because it's such a strong emphasis. And somebody asked me why, and I said, well, I think some of it had to do with when Guido originally created the language. He created a language that was easy to read, because he realized that people spend a lot more time reading code than they do writing code, which sounds a little bit strange at first, but once you get into some of these projects and you're reviewing code, and even if you're trying to take an existing code base and make a change to it, you're actually reading quite a bit of code. And from that, and the emphasis on education and helping people learn how to use Python, I think that has sort of lended itself to the hopefully welcoming community that we're striving to achieve.
Okay. Yeah. That's quite interesting, and I believe Python community is very welcoming community.
Good.
That's what interests me Python also before. Okay, I think we can step back into the past. Could you share with us what is your inspiration or motivation?
Well, I'll talk about Python first.
Okay.
So it was back in 2013. I had taken a long break from tech and was coming back to tech after having been an engineering manager when I had left tech. And I was looking for projects that were welcoming that I could work on. And the first project that I tried to work on was the Linux kernel, which I did for about 6 months, and then kind of realized, well, maybe not for me. But in that time span, I actually got involved with Jessica McKellar, Ashish Laroya, and Shauna Gordon-McKeon, who were working on a project called OpenHatch, which was a nonprofit that helped people learn how to contribute to open source. We would go to different college campuses, and we had a curriculum that we wrote out. And this was before GitHub had guides on how to contribute to open source, or software carpentry, or any of the carpentries were in existence. And so we were sort of ground zero, if you will, for trying to foster good habits, things like READMEs, having documentation so people can install your project. Because let's face it, if you can't install something, you can't use it. And if it's a frustrating installation experience, you also will likely opt out of using it and think, oh, there's another tool that I can use that will not be as much of a headache. And so it was through OpenHatch, as well as the San Diego Python user group, that I got really started in Python. So I didn't start with Python until 2013. So compared to some of the core developers that have been around for like 30 years, I'm relatively new to Python, though not new to programming. And OpenHatch had a Django code base, and that's where I started getting involved with Python. And I actually really liked the language because it was easy to read. It was visually pretty clean. Other languages I had worked in included C++ and Java, which is a little more chatty on a page. And I enjoyed it. And then I started getting to know some of the Python folks in San Diego. And it was just at the time where the economy in San Diego was not going so well, and there had been a lot of folks that were out of work. And at that time, Python was still fairly difficult to install. We were still predominantly on Python 2. Python 3 was around, but most people used Python 2. And it was somewhat difficult to install on Windows, much less Linux and Mac. And I said at the user group, oh, I'm volunteering at a makerspace. I'll just come an hour early and, teach the one or two people that wanted help getting installed. And so I did that a few weeks in a row, and it grew from like helping 2 people to a dozen people, to the third week when we had like 30 people, and we said, wait a second, we need to do something different, because nobody anticipated that on a Saturday afternoon, people would want to come and just hang out and code for a couple hours. So we were able to get space to do it on a regular basis, and started writing tutorials, and didn't have a set agenda for any of the meetings. It was really like, come, socialize, code, much like a sprint. And what's great is some of the people that were brand new to Python when we started the first series of Intro to Python are now accomplished speakers, writers in Python, and have given tutorials at PyCon US. So, and it's continued to grow, that giving back. So some of those original people are now the instructors for these weekly work groups. And it's been a little bit different now that we're doing the social distancing thing, but we do have a Slack channel and people to get together on that. And then we do the occasional meetup online, much like other folks are doing as well. But that was my introduction to Python. Mostly, I just enjoyed being around the people. I enjoyed working with a language that was really versatile, from web development to hardware like CircuitPython or MicroPython. Python's a very, very flexible language, and also a language that you can get things done very quickly. And in large part, that is because there is such a huge ecosystem of Python packages, like either hosted on PyPI or Conda Forge. And because of all those great libraries, oftentimes you can do meaningful work in 20 lines of code or less, which for a lot of languages, that's you're just getting your environment set up with those many statements. So, but that was my introduction to Python. It'd be interesting to hear somebody else's introduction to Python as well. I can't see you, so I don't know how many folks are brand new to Python. And if you are brand new to Python, I say welcome. We're really glad that you've joined us. We hope you will learn Python at your pace, that you'll dive in pretty quickly to using a third-party library versus learning the syntax and all of that side of Python. It's good to know, but where Python really stands out is you can get meaningful work done while you're learning. For those folks that have been in Python for a while, hopefully conferences like this one is helping you level up your skills. I quite frankly think some of the conferences in Asia have some of the best content out there regarding Python, because people are really pushing the envelope and using it in new and different ways. And I think that's great. And for those of you that are advanced, I hope you spend at least a little bit of time not only sharpening your skills, but giving back to the community, whether it's through writing or through a user group, or just helping people with issues online on GitHub. Those are all great ways to participate and continue to expand your Python knowledge, because not even Guido, who wrote the language, understands all of Python. So, I encourage you to start and continue.
Thank you. That's very interesting to know. And I noticed that you enjoy teaching, giving back to the community. I think you are very active in many other things besides coding, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's all, if it were me just coding, I could make one thing. But if I help others learn how to code, they can make lots of things. So I kind of feel like it's time well spent for me. And it's really great, 2-3 years down the line, to see people who maybe I merged their first pull request or, help them learn Git, to see them doing websites and, Kubernetes and all kinds of projects with Jupyter. And I think that's what it's all about. It's like we use code to solve problems, whether it's small problems that we have, whether it is a technical problem, or on a much broader basis. One of the things that I think that Jupyter has been really helpful for is a lot of the world's hardest problems, hunger, the pandemic, things like that, are not going to be solved by one individual or by applying one particular science. And the ability to collaborate across sciences, and as well as public policy, economics, nursing, communication, is really important. And I think the Jupyter notebooks have given a way for people to communicate with each other and to break down barriers in knowledge. For folks that might not have seen the Jupyter notebook, what it is a series of cells, much like in Excel or a spreadsheet, typically one line of them, that get executed sequentially. And in each cell, you can have prose in the form of Markdown. You can have Python code plus 60-something or more other languages. You can use code for those. You can do audio clips. YouTube video clips. One of my favorite 2D and 3D visualizations. And in addition to that, widgets that let you control elements within the notebook. And I think it helps bring content to life. I have a good friend, he teaches physics and mechanics, and he has gone and taken a classic mechanics textbook and broken it down into 20 series of lectures. Each lecture has a notebook, and at the top of each notebook is an animated visualization of the particular concept that he'll be teaching. So he might have a little cart that, is bouncing around on a bumpy road, and there's sliders to change the friction or the weight of the cart or the, angle that the cart is traveling on land. And it really helps people understand the concepts behind things. One of my favorite tutorials I ever participated in was actually one that was a multidiscipline. So it was bio and physics and sort of biomedical stuff. And it was actually going through a series of notebooks that would demonstrate how a person balances. You were basically simulating the legs, the torso, the head. And what you could do is change like the length of somebody's legs or where their center of mass was. And you would then see in the very last notebook, the person, like, either they're not very steady and they're going back and forth, or they've, balanced just fine. And in a 2-hour workshop, we were able to get that information across to people, which I think is just phenomenal. So I think it's pretty fun, all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think you showed that during the Python, PyCon, my MY 2019, the project, the biomedical project.
Yeah, I think I did actually.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Just now you mentioned that the core developers are starting to maintain a triage group so that you can some sort of welcoming new contributors to become core developers, right? Do you have any tips to share for other developers? Because actually every year when I talk to participants in PyCon, some of them are interested to contribute, but they're not that confident with themselves, and also they feel that
Yeah.
there are some hurdle to join.
So what I typically tell people, I don't discourage you from contributing to core Python if that is what you're really interested in. But I do encourage people to look at projects outside of Python that use Python. And the reason why is because you might be able to make more contributions and learn more in a project that is moving a little bit quicker than Python, where you can see sort of your PRs get merged in faster and get faster feedback than perhaps in core Python. Core Python, we are with like the triage team and some more tooling that's coming down the line, we've been really trying to put an effort on shortening the time span when that people have before they hear back from a core developer about a PR that they've submitted. It's kind of a challenge because in many times it's hard to find a quote unquote beginner issue for folks to work on. So people sort of have to kind of work at it for a while, asking questions. I encourage people, Anthony Shaw has a new book out about CPython internals, which is absolutely great. I wound up, he had done it as like a blog post or something initially, and I had printed out every single page and then asked him, like, why don't you make a book out of this? Because the content was really excellent. And so that like explains to you really how CPython is crafted and the architecture behind it. And for anyone that's interested in computer architecture or programming language design, it's a really good exercise to go through that. Because not only does it apply to Python, it applies to many other languages as well. And so core Python, I encourage you to do it. Check out the discourse channels. That's a great place to start. Following the mailing list sometimes can be a little bit of a challenge because they might not always be as welcoming as we would like. You have some people that might want to show off their quote unquote knowledge and forget that there are people that are newer in the channels, but discourse is much, much nicer, as well as typically discussions on the bug tracker and also in GitHub. But I would start with the dev guide. Start working through the dev guide. If you see a core Python sprint, I highly encourage you to do that. The other thing to do is in the beginning of the dev guide is how to build Python from source code, and then also run tests on it. And that is an excellent way to get started, which is basically, build Python and see how it comes together. And then I typically encourage folks to focus in on a part of the standard library that interests them, whether it's audio stuff or networking, security, async IO, and really learn it in depth, and then contribute that back. So yeah, but I think it's definitely doable. As for other projects to contribute to, I know most of the projects in the scientific community and data science community around Python are very happy to get more contributors because most of the maintainers have way more work than they can possibly do. I would look for projects that have documentation, that have a reasonable testing suite, even if it's like 50%, that's good because you can always be the person that writes additional tests. And look for a contributor's guide. And sometimes it may be a contributing.md file in the root of a repo, or it may be in part of the documentation of the project. But oftentimes, if you see a contributor's guide, that's a good signal that the folks in that project have an interest in mentoring and growing contributors. But yeah, I encourage you to just try it. And if you don't like it, try a different project.
Thank you. I think that's good tips, especially the looking for the contributor guide.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just,
yeah.
I mean, it's a nice thing as a maintainer to do for new contributors because you want them to be able to install your project from the source code. You want them to understand how to run the tests and also the norms of the project, like how the project communicates within the project. Are they using Gitter? Are they using Discourse? Are they really just relying on GitHub or GitLab? And that is probably my biggest challenge on a daily basis, is the number of different communication channels that I need to check. I stink with email. Ivy knows that, she's got the let me ping you on Twitter or something down, just because the volume of email is so high. But, the project, just there's not only the number of projects, but also the different types of communication. So if somebody reaches out to me and I don't respond, feel free to nag me. It's not that I don't want to respond. It's more that I probably don't have the time, or it got filtered somehow in my emails stacks. But right now I'm working at a startup related to notebooks. So it's been a very busy 6 months, I will say.
Okay. Okay. My last question is more about you. How do you keep yourself from burning out? Because you have a lot of things in your, and then you're currently working on startup as well, which is, I think, a monumental task to do.
Yeah. It's a challenge. And I mean, there was certainly a point in time when I was working on Jupyter full time that I did hit burnout. And it was largely due to the fact that we had grown so quickly, and we really had so few people that were dedicated to the project, in terms of, people who their job was in academia to contribute to the Jupyter project. And it put a lot of burden on many of us. And, for me in particular, I was doing a lot of speaking around Jupyter because Fernando and Brian were really busy. And so a lot of travel. And so that makes it a little more challenging. But in general, what I try to do to avoid burnout is to recognize, I'm human. And there are just going to be times where I need to step away, take care of me, and then come back once I'm feeling stronger or have more energy. I also try to not respond to issues if I'm angry. I will let them sit and wait until I've calmed down, because one of the things that's difficult with communication channels is you lose the tone or the intent of how somebody's writing something. So I try not to jump to conclusions. I try and give folks the benefit of the doubt until they have done something multiple times that would be considered non-professional behavior. But, some of it is also, the way to avoid burnout is to surround yourself with folks that you enjoy working with, who are, interested in, positive communication, and as opposed to a lot of negativity. And, it's okay to step back. I know Marietta, as well as Brett Cannon, they take at least 1 month off from open source every year, and just to kind of enjoy life without open source. I don't typically do any open source work on the weekends, so that's sort of my break time away from blinky screens and electronics. And most of all, I try and appreciate the little things, the little accomplishments either that I've made or other people have made, because those are the ones that are going to happen most often. And if you can take some joy in those and some pride in the work on a day-to-day basis, it does a lot to hold burnout at bay. So hopefully that will help somebody.
That's very useful tips. Okay, I think there's no question from the audience. Sure. Any question? Yeah. You already addressed the question about how to, is it possible to contribute as a code? and documentation as code developer.
Yes, yes. And it is a key thing that is needed, especially folks that have an interest in internationalization of languages. There's been a lot of translations of the documentation, which is really helpful. Julien Pallard, who's a core developer, has sort of spearheaded that and with great success. But I encourage you, if you're interested in documentation or in writing documentation, it's a great way to get to know a code base really well as building your skills. I think I'm reading some of the comments. Somebody had written in the chat, I think taking off a week a year is good to revive yourself. Bill Gates practices that every year. Actually, I didn't know that, so that's kind of interesting. Another question was, will compiling languages be included into Jupyter? Probably not Jupyter itself. I mean, the language kernels are able to execute languages, but they rely on the underlying language. Jupyter is really less of an IDE and more a tool for developing computational narratives. And by that, I mean bringing together prose and visualizations, code, and all of that. So sometimes you want to demo snippets in C, let's say. Yeah. So what you would do is you would have a C++ or C kernel, and then you can write notebooks with that. You can write notebooks in R and Ruby. And yeah, I mean, it's a great way to demo stuff and teach stuff. So if you have any trouble getting started with that, ask on the Jupyter discourse channels, like, how do I install a C kernel or a C++ kernel?
All right. Any question? I have a question from Mark. How do you keep your edge as one of the core developer?
Wow. That is a hard question. I think part of it, I've had the pleasure of working with Guido for a number of years now, and it's important to remember that not everybody knows everything. And so I kind of have accepted that there are just a lot of things that I will never learn. That there are other things that I know very well and could execute that, pretty quickly. And I have, my interest in learning is not just empowering others to learn, but I love learning new things and trying new things. And I think as a core developer, some of that is learning from other languages, what they're doing. I actually do some JavaScript work as well, and some work in Rust. C will always be one of my favorite languages because it was one of the ones I started with. But I think as a developer, if the best way to stay up on things and to have an edge, if you will, is to write lots of programs, small programs, trying functions out, trying libraries out, because you will... reading about a language is not the same as actually working in a language. And if you want to code, you need to practice coding. Just like if you want to play violin, you need to practice playing violin, not just reading about violin. So, good question.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are almost done here. There's no more question. Okay. I think for my side, the key takeaway for me is to be a core developer, you have to have a competitive interest to learn a lot of things and try to communicate, try to contribute to smaller, start with contributing to smaller project first,
Mhm.
and then you also have to organize yourself. That's impressive that you have a dashboard that you can always check.
Well, I don't know that everybody needs a dashboard, but
Yeah.
I think one of the things that makes a good core developer is that you have some level of familiarity with the code, that you have some humility, and also the ability to build trust with the people that you're working with. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to do something that is going to damage the language. So, because you've got so many people running their businesses on top of it, but yeah, I think it's just you start and see where it takes you.
Okay, I think that's all we have. The time we have, Carol.
Okay,
Thank you very much for your willingness to be here with us, supporting PyCon Effect 2020. We hope to see you again in future, in person maybe.
uh, well, hopefully you'll see me in person, but some of
Yeah.
you may see me in a panel next weekend. So,
Oh yeah, of course. We
um,
are looking forward to that.
yeah, but it was my pleasure. I hope I was able to at least give you some small nugget of wisdom, and I hope you'll try building things in Python.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have an announcement from program manager. So the next session will be sponsored talk from Microsoft by Joao Gonçalo Birim. So the talk start at 10 a.m. So it's about now. Okay, thank you very much. This is the end of the interview with Caroline. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ivy. Bye.
Bye bye.